with the adult class. And so, continuing the series on Christians in the workplace, this lesson is going to be on relationships in the workplace, especially how to get along with your boss, if you've ever wondered about that, and bosses, how to get along with employees. And so, covering some interesting and practical topics today. Brother Greg's going to be teaching that. And so, let me pray, get us started this morning, and then he'll get into the lesson today. Lord, thank you for our time together in your house. I pray that you would bless the teaching, bless the singing and the preaching to come later. Love you, Lord. Thank you for your goodness. And we pray this in Jesus' wonderful name. Amen.
All right, good morning. Like that's a lot of pressure if I'm gonna have to teach you how to get along with your boss. That's see if I can pull this off or not. Yeah, like Pastor said, we'll be in a study this morning on relationships in the workplace. A lot of good practical points in this lesson as we get into it. A couple of rhetorical questions as we start out. So no need to answer these, but do you like your boss? Do you get along with your coworkers? And then what is your reputation at work? So if people were to kind of discuss with your coworkers, what is your reputation both with your coworkers and your leadership at work? I think one of the hardest things that we have in our job to deal with is usually the people, right? Obviously there's stress associated with other things, but the people with who we work is one of the most significant relationships that we have. As I look at my work week, I probably spend as much time with people at work as I do with my family throughout the course of a week. So those are certainly significant relationships to develop. And then a lot of times we can work with people who we may see as uncaring, unreasonable. We may see them as unfair. You may even be in a situation where you're at work and you feel like maybe the people that are around you are incompetent or don't understand the job, and that can make a work week very frustrating as we go through the week and with those relationships. But I think if you look at those relationships, those are what really establish your testimony at work. So I know I've in the past been very focused on, how do I make sure I'm prepared to share the gospel at work, and how do I make sure that I know to say the right thing, or how do I bring it up in the right way, and do I have the right answers? But I think more important is that the relationships that we have with our coworkers, and the way we interact with them is more of a testimony in a lot of ways than we're going to have a chance to witness directly. And so it's very important that we look at that as we go through our interactions with our coworkers. So I think if we're honest as well, a lot of the difficulties that we perceive with our coworkers and with our boss are actually have as much to do with us as it does with them, right? So that's not to say that our coworkers don't have issues, that our boss may not have issues, that they're perfect. But I think if we approach them with the right attitude and realize that we're responsible for our reaction, not necessarily for their actions, but for our reaction to that, we have a tendency to I think forget that our reaction has as much to do with that relationship as anything. So today we'll be talking about the biblical worldview, like we've been talking about in the past couple weeks, to the work relationship and to work, that will confront what could be a sinful attitude that we have towards our coworkers and towards our bosses, and help us to understand that we need to see people as not obstacles or competition at work, but that people that are made in God's image and that are there to be loved by Him, and we're to demonstrate that love as we interact with them. So when we talked in the past couple weeks about loving our neighbors as ourselves, and this is kind of extending that relationship into the workplace as well. And I think if you look at most work environments, there are a lot of times locations and places where God's love and love in general is in short supply. It can be very focused on a task at hand. And so if we can approach work with this mindset, it'll set us apart from our coworkers and point others to Jesus Christ. So a few weeks ago, we talked about how ultimately working for Jesus Christ in our jobs, no matter who our earthly boss is, and that the assignment that He gives to us is that we would point others to him. And so we'll be talking about that a little more today as well. And so I think Osei taught a lesson a couple weeks ago that was focused on the question of why we work. And today we'll be talking about the implications of who we work with and how we interact with those people. So we'll start with the basic mindset of how Jesus Christ calls us to interact with our coworkers. And then we'll also talk, so that's kind of a subordinate relationship. And then we'll also talk if you're in a position of authority or a boss in the workplace, what God calls us to do in those situations. So this morning we'll talk about faith-fueled service. And basically once you realize that Jesus Christ is your first responsibility at work, and your responsibility is to follow him first, then you'll realize that your job is not just about you anymore. And I'm guilty of this. A lot of times you can show up to work with a list of things you need to do, or with a goal for the day, or with a goal for your career. And it's very easy to forget that as a Christian, that's not our primary focus in the workplace. And the workplace in that sense is just an arena for us to worship God and to point others to Jesus Christ. So obviously the most important thing we do as Christians is to love God first. But right after that, the Bible's pretty clear their responsibility is to love other people. And so if you'll turn to Colossians 3, and we'll be in Colossians 3, chapter 22, or chapter 3, verse 22. And we'll be reading through chapter 4, verse 1. Okay, so chapter 22, or verse 22 says, "Servants, obey in all things your masters, according to the flesh, not with eye service as men pleasers, but in singleness of heart, fearing God. And whatsoever ye do, do it heartily, as to the Lord, and not unto men, knowing that of the Lord ye shall receive the reward of your inheritance, for ye serve the Lord Christ. But he that doeth wrong shall receive for the wrong which he hath done, and there is no respect of persons. Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master in heaven." So if you kind of look at this passage, I think one of the key points that you catch out of it is that the way we treat other people, in general, but also in the workplace, should be colored by the realization that God is watching, right? And so I think a lot of times we tend to segregate. When we're at church, we're very focused on things of God. When we're at work, sometimes we forget that that's still a place where we're accountable to Him, and that He's aware of what we're doing. And then if you also look at what Paul is talking about here in the New Testament, is kind of a reference to the evil institution of slavery. So a lot of those things, obviously, we don't deal with in our current employee relationships, but the principles remain the same, right? And that's that applying the truth of the gospel to the root cause of a problem in the work environment is usually a function of the sinful condition of our hearts, and this passage can definitely give us pointers on how to deal with that in the workplace. So if you look at the passage, it's pretty clear that Paul is challenging our responsibilities as Christians to serve those that are both our co-workers, and also to serve those who are in authority over us. And that's not a common mindset in the workplace. A lot of times we tend to look at supervision and our boss as somebody that directs us, and we follow out those directions. But really, as a Christian, we should be looking for ways to serve our supervision and our leadership at work. And our boss is definitely one of those that we can do that with. So Paul urges those to obey those who are in authority over us in everything. And so, I think you have to be cautious with this one, right? So obviously there's not a command there to obey someone in authority that would ask you to do something that's sinful. Obviously, in the military, we talk a lot about the concept of a lawful order. So in the military, if you have a leader who gives you an order that is lawful, you're bound to do that. If it's unlawful, you're not. And it's kind of the same parallel in the work environment, that if we're asked to do something that's it's not sinful, then we should do that. And I think it's pretty easy to give ourselves an out when we see something as maybe that doesn't make sense. Maybe you think, oh well, that doesn't make sense. He doesn't understand what's going on. That's kind of a stupid way of looking at the problem. But in those situations, as Christians, we are to carry out those tasks as we're asked to do at work. And then also, not doing it is not enough. So it's very easy to carry out a task that you've been given, but you should do it with a sincerity of heart and a reverence for the Lord. And I think it's also important that we realize that there are times when you're asked to do something as a subordinate that you may not understand the whole picture, right? So sometimes we think, oh, well, that doesn't make sense. Why am I being asked to do this? That when you're in a leadership position, and any of you that are in your job, you probably realize there's a perspective you may have that others don't in terms of what the company would need or what the organization would need. And I think we have to be cognizant of the fact as subordinates that we don't always understand everything that a leader is going through and trying to get done, and the fact that being a boss is a difficult task, right? So as a Christian, we should definitely look for ways to support our boss. And then obviously the second point is that our obedience to our leadership, to our boss, should have nothing to do with whether he or she is watching as those things are carried out. So we kind of talked about at the beginning, but the reality is that God is watching us, and the motivation of that should be much greater than the fact that you're going to be held accountable for a quarterly performance report or anything like that. So we have to keep that in mind as we go through our workday. So if you look at chapter 4, verse 1, Paul also brings that same principle to bear on those who are in authority over others. So that's the verse. It says, "Masters, give unto your servants that which is just and equal, knowing that ye also have a master who is in heaven." So we'll get to some other practical pointers for being a good boss in the second part of this lesson. But if you can treat your employees with respect and kindness, clearly that's something that would bring honor to God as he sees what you're doing in those roles. So I'll give you kind of the key phrase for this lesson, like we said, is faith-filled service. And so we are to be servants in the workplace, whether we're bosses or employees, because ultimately as Christians, we're servants of Jesus Christ. And we're not necessarily working towards the rewards we can see. We're working for sometimes an eternal goal. As a servant, we need to trust that having that posture is correct, not necessarily because we feel like it's correct, but because simply Jesus said that we're to be a servant, right? So a lot of times we may not see the benefits of that in our workplace. And to be quite honest, we may not see the benefits in our current job, and some of those benefits may be eternal benefits, but we're just called to be servants regardless of the outcome. So this first section we'll talk through a couple marks of a faithful servant in the workplace. I think you've got an outline that walks you through. Yeah, so you've got each of those marks there. So mark 1 is a determination to not complain. So I think anybody that's been in the workplace kind of around the water cooler in the morning knows that a typical work environment is very much a place where people like to complain about what's going on in the office. A lot of times it's a time to point out the things maybe your supervision has done that you don't agree with. So one of the best ways to be a powerful witness at work is to not take part in those sort of conversations. And it's so easy to be drawn into them. But obviously complaints are a very common workplace situation that you run into. And if you come along at work and you're the type of person who does not take part in those conversations, or you kind of have, there's always opportunities to kind of change the focus of the conversation. If you do that, you will stand out as a witness to others very clearly. So let's go to another writing that Paul had on this. We'll go to Philippians 2, verses 14 through 16. So verse 14 says, "Do all things without murmuring and disputing, that ye may be blameless and harmless, the sons of God, without rebuke, in the midst of a crooked and perverse nation, among whom ye shine as lights in the world, holding forth the word of life, that I may rejoice in the day of Christ, that I have not run in vain, neither labored in vain." So if you kind of look at how this passage starts in verse 14, it seems like a fairly simple exhortation. So, do things without murmuring and disputing, that, don't complain, essentially. So fairly unremarkable. These are things that we would all probably say to our kids, right? Is, hey, don't complain, do things with the right attitude. So it doesn't seem like a big task to do. But if you look at the outcome of it in verse 15, the outcome of doing that, and especially in the workplace, would be that we shine as a light in the world. So it's a pretty cool concept to think, if you can just take the simple steps of showing up to work and try not to complain and focus on the task ahead of you, that's a great way to shine as a light in the world. So a pretty grand outcome for something that seems as simple as just not complaining. And so I'm not suggesting, when I say that's a simple outcome or a simple ask at the beginning, that's easy, right? Because it's not. I think most of our natural desires are to let other people around us know that we're not happy with our circumstances. Maybe we feel like our circumstances are uniquely bad, or there's something at work where we're not happy and we feel like it's worthy of a complaint. So this is not easy, and it's going to be fighting against our human nature for sure to act this way in the workplace. So again, Mark 1 is just a determination to not complain at the workplace. Mark number 2 is a happy submission to authority. So we talked about this already, but if our bosses are asking us things to do things that are not sinful in nature, as Christians, we should obey those in authority over us with a sincere heart, and we talked about that in Colossians 3:22. So, this is one I think that kind of strikes close to me in the military, because I think a lot of times in the military and in any work environment, you can be given an order, asked to do something, and you may do it, but you do it with kind of this attitude of, well, this is the dumbest thing I've ever seen, but I'll go ahead and do it. Or you can take a job from, if your boss gives you a task, you can maybe communicate it to your subordinates in a way that's something in the lines of, well, boss said to do this. I don't really understand why, but we're just going to go ahead and do it. So that is clearly not submitting to authority, right? So you've done what you're asked to do, but you need to do it with the right heart and the right spirit. So it's also easy to submit to our leadership when you have a boss who is kind, who's understanding, who you kind of see eye to eye with, but a little more difficult when you're working for a boss that is arrogant, maybe self-absorbed, maybe doesn't communicate as well. I personally have had a pretty good season at work where I've had a boss. My last couple bosses have been very easy to get along with, very good at communicating what they want done, but then allowing you to kind of carry out those tasks without a lot of micromanagement. But we're not guaranteed that, and that's not always been the case. So I think we just need to be cautious that when we have a leader that we maybe don't see eye to eye with, that we do those things with the right heart attitude, and not just with a visible outward appearance that we're doing what we've been asked to do. And then, I look back at a couple of situations I've been in where you kind of fall prey to the sitting around and discussing all the things about your leadership that you don't like. I had one opportunity. I was deployed with a group of young officers. We were in a difficult situation. And in a deployed environment, you spend all the time with each other, right? So that's lunch, breakfast, dinner. And we kind of fell into this. That was time we just sat around and complained about leadership, right? And as I look back on that, I realized I lost a key opportunity to be a witness to them, right? So it's really easy to fall into, and you really have to watch that, because it can once you kind of fall into that trap, it's really hard to get out of it. So a couple pointers to deal with a difficult situation with a boss specifically. One really easy way is just to start praying for that individual. That'll completely change your mindset on them. So, pray if you know about their family, pray for their family. pray for their relationships, pray for their circumstances, pray for the challenges they're facing at work, and that'll definitely change, I think, your focus towards your boss. And obviously, if they're not saved, pray for their salvation. And so that will really, I think, change your mindset um, towards them. And then obviously pray for your heart that you'll be able to do tasks just not out of a resignation to doing them because you're asked to, but pray that you'll be able to do things at work with a true sincerity of heart. So just a summary of that mark, the happy submission to authority. That's going to be marked by submitting to authority even when it's not fun or when you may feel that it's not fair. I've been guilty in the past of kind of having a bit of a justice complex at work, right? You feel like this isn't right or this shouldn't be done, and I think sometimes as Christians we need to realize that we're not promised that. We're not promised that everything's going to be perfect and fair to us at work, but we still need to submit to authority and serve with that sincerity of heart. So mark number 3 of a good subordinate is humility. So if you look at a lot of the problems at work that we may run into may stem from a feeling that we may keep internal, but we maybe feel like that the task we've been given is somehow beneath us, right? That this is a task that really I'm more valuable than this, or I can't believe that this place expects me to do X, Y, or Z. And if you really look at the example of Jesus Christ and as Christians, there's really no place for that sort of mindset in a Christian's life. Obviously, when you look at what Jesus Christ did for us and came to earth, the sacrifices he made, we really don't have the right in the workplace as a Christian to say that we feel like a task is beneath us or to complain about those sorts of things. If you go to Philippians 2, verses 5 through 8, I'll read that. It says, "Let this mind be in you, which is also in Christ Jesus, who being in the form of God, thought it not robbery to be equal with God, but made himself of no reputation, and took upon him the form of a servant, and was made in the likeness of men. And being found in the fashion of man, he humbled himself and became obedient unto death, even the death of the cross." So basically, I think the key to this, to humility as a Christian, is no matter what your situation is, we have to realize that we'll never be asked to stoop as low as Jesus stooped for us. And in the workplace, that'll just kind of change our mindset towards humility. And then that kind of leads you into faith-filled service in the workplace that's just marked by the example of Jesus Christ. Mark number 4 is godly competitiveness. So, I think any of you that have been in a workplace understand that a lot of jobs are kind of a place where people's ambitions clash, right? So you might have a coworker and you feel like maybe you're competing with them for the next promotion. You've got a boss who's probably trying to earn a profit for the company, but also move up in the company. And so a lot of times ambition can be everywhere in the work environment. And as Christians, we need to be careful that we don't remove ourselves from competition, but we do it in a way that reflects Jesus Christ. So clearly, I don't think there's any command for us to never compete with others in the Bible. But I think we have to be careful that we're not playing by the world's rule book for competition. The kind of that cutthroat mentality of getting the promotion by stepping on someone else's back. Those are the sorts of things as a Christian we need to avoid. I think this lesson had a good way of putting it is what our goal should be to win by running faster and not by tripping our competitors. And so as a Christian, obviously, we should be competitive and we should want to compete at work and do the right thing, but not at the expense of others. So just kind of a conclusion on the employee aspect of this lesson is I don't think there's any magic formulas that are going to help you deal with a difficult boss. A lot of this is just the way you approach work in prayer. But if you've been thinking of your bosses or your coworkers as an obstacle to your career advancement, just pray that God will help you see them as a person that God wants you to serve. And then continue to focus on working willingly and not grudgingly. And that's very much an internal struggle, I think, because even if you can have that outward appearance, we need to be careful that we really have that heart for doing the right thing. So that's kind of the main points for uh, working as an employee. And now we'll kind of transition to what it means to be a Christian boss. And that kind of the same love your neighbor as yourself concept is very applicable from the boss's chair as well. So we'll look at 5 principles that the lesson has for operating as a Christian boss. Principle number 1 is that authority is from God. So Genesis 1:28, if you look at it, says, God blessed them and said unto them, be fruitful and multiply and replenish the earth and subdue it and have dominion over the fish of the sea and over the fowl of the air and of every living thing that moveth upon the earth. So if you look at the word dominion, I think it's easy to think, well, in that situation, God gave mankind dominion over creation. That word kind of has a context sometimes of maybe domination or control, but there's also an aspect of cultivating and caring for. And so it's easy to think that as Christians or as human beings, God somehow put us in this unique position to be in power, and that's part of it. But if you look at it, it's really not. We're not given that authority because of anything associated with us. We're really given that because it was a divine grant of authority from God to cultivate the garden. And it's kind of the same authority that's been given if you're in a position at work where you're in charge. It's not a right. It's a divine grant that God has given you so that you can use it for the good of those who are under you and not to serve yourself. And this is really a hard issue. I think if you're in a position of leadership, it's so easy to start to lose the focus on what you're there for, right? And to make it kind of a self-serving position. But as a Christian, this is really another area where you can set yourself apart from others around you, and people will see if you have a genuine desire to serve others through the example Jesus Christ set us. It'll definitely stand out at work. So just in summary, that first principle that our authority is from God, the basic point is how you wield your authority really says more about the God you serve than it does about you. So principle number 2 is authority should serve and bless others. So the Bible has a couple examples for us of authority where it leads to blessing for those who are under. One example would be Joseph and his authority in Egypt that enabled his nation to survive during the famine. Nehemiah used his authority among the returning exiles to complete a wall that would defend them. So obviously, not all of us are I don't think any of us are political rulers, but that same principle can apply at your work. That authority rightly exercised leads to blessing. So when you use that authority to build up and not to tear down, that will be the result will be that you'll be a life and a light in your workplace and be set apart from other people. So principle number 3 is that authority can be abused. I talked about this a little at the beginning, but there's sufficient evidence in history that where there's authority, it will most likely be abused. I've always heard the saying, absolute power corrupts absolutely. And so I think if human nature is if you're in a position of power and you're not checked by a relationship with Jesus Christ, that will lead in the wrong direction. In Matthew 20:25, you don't need to turn there, but Jesus said, you know that the princes of the Gentiles exercise dominion over them, and they are great, and they that are great exercise authority upon them. So that's in a world of sin, that's usually the case you see with someone who's given authority. But then he goes on to say, it shall not be so among you in Matthew 20:26. So I think we just need to be cautious with any power that we're given at work, any authority that we're given at work, that you keep watch over your heart, because it's really it can get away. You can kind of slip into those patterns of the world. And then don't use for evil and selfish purposes something that God intended to be used for good and as a source of light for others. So the next principle is that authority should be sacrificial. Um, I'll read you Matthew 20, verses 26 through 28. It says, "But it shall not be so among you, but whoever will be great among you, let him be your minister. And whoever will be chief among you, let him be your servant. Even as the Son of Man came not to be ministered unto, but to minister, and to give his life a ransom for many." So, this passage is pretty clear. The example we've been given is that godly leaders are to serve others, and that service is also costly. So the verse that says, "Who will be chief among you, let him be your servant." Um, I think if you truly are looking to serve others at work, you'll find that it costs your priorities for the day at times, because you may have a list of things you want to get done that don't happen because you're serving others with your limited time. It could also potentially affect some of your short-term success for the organization, because you have to put some things on the back burner to serve others. But I think the long-term impact, both to the organization and to investing in others, is what God would call us to do. So then principle number 5 is godly use of authority is gospel motivated and grace empowered. So um, obviously, without the gospel and without that focus at work, we just won't be successful in doing this. So this is just taking the gospel and using the gospel that empowers us to impact how we act at work, and how we make much of Christ at work by loving, serving, and blessing others. So we'll just close with a couple practical points on how to lead and manage well. So the most important strategy to leading well is to really cultivate a heart that truly desires to do so. So there's no substitute for desire. I mean, you can read plenty of self-help books on how to be a good leader, but if you don't have a true desire to serve others, it's just not going to happen. And so I think um, the best source of that, I think, is the Bible and the example Jesus Christ set for us. And then obviously, once you are sure of a genuine desire to serve and lead others, it's just a function of determining what will you do differently. How do you deal with things that you have done in the past that you shouldn't do? And then that same example we talked about, of praying for those around you, praying for interactions, praying for areas of potential conflict that may arise. And then I think the part that's hard, I think, for all of us is when we do mess up, is showing people who work for us that we're sorry, and showing that asking for forgiveness when we don't deal with things in the right way. I think that kind of the same thing applies in a parent-child relationship. A lot of times we think, oh, I'm in a position of authority, I don't want to show weakness by saying I shouldn't have done that. And that's not going to help with the situation to lead and serve others. So as you do mess up, and we all will in the work environment, it's important to kind of recognize those areas, and admit when we haven't done everything that we should have done in that area. And then another point of the lesson I think is a good one is, if you're in a position where you're supervising others, take the time to schedule regular one-on-one meetings with your employees to kind of get a feel for what's going on. I had a boss. He just retired out of the wing. I think a couple of you had met him, but he was the wing commander of the base. So he had about in the neighborhood of 2,000 people under him, and he took the time when he took command. He made a point that he wanted to schedule a one-on-one meeting with every kind of mid-level and above supervisor. And so he said he was in the position, I think, about 3 years, and he just set apart time every week to meet with those folks individually. And by the end of that, he had a really good understanding of what was going on in their lives, personal things, and also he had an opportunity to sit down and communicate his goals and desires for the organization face to face. So I thought that was a really good example. But that's an area where it's really easy to be so task saturated and focused on that at work that we forget to take the time to really sit down and interact with the people that are working for us. There are just few bosses in the world that are willing to take the time to do that, and to mentor those that are coming behind us, and that's a benefit to the organization, but also a benefit to your ability to be a witness to others. So I think I think we hit the key points. Just in conclusion, I hope these are just some practical reminders um, that can help us remember what it is to be a Christian in the workplace and to take that responsibility seriously as we approach the work environment throughout the week. Let's go ahead and close in a word of prayer, and I think we've got some food out there. Father, thank you for the day you've given us. Thank you for your word, and thank you for the applicability to our lives. And specifically this morning, we just think of the instruction you've given us on how to be successful in the workplace and to serve you in the workplace, and just ask you to help each of us to make improvements in that area of our lives, and that we would be able to be that shining light in the workplace that you've called us to be through your word. Just thank you for the food that you've got for us this morning, and just ask you to bless our time of fellowship this morning and be with the service to come, and ask these things in your name. Amen.